During a tense House Oversight Committee hearing on federal transparency that had stretched over 5 hours, the air remained charged. Reporters hunched over phones, aides whispered, and all eyes anticipated the moment. Donald J. Trump sat at the center table, unbothered, casually flipping through papers in his signature navy suit and red tie, exuding the confidence of someone unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by a black Congresswoman from South Dallas with no patience for games. Representative Jasmine Crockett, sharp in a cobalt blazer and black glasses, adjusted her mic and calmly asked why Trump's 2019 and 2020 disclosures showed major gaps in the valuation of his overseas assets. Trump smirked, leaned back, and brushed off the question. "I've been more transparent than anyone here, and frankly your tone is disrespectful." Crockett didn't flinch. "Respect isn't a tone, Mr. Trump, it's earned," she replied. A few murmurs stirred as cameras zoomed in. Then, with dismissive confidence, Trump looked her in the eye and said, "Sit down, girl." The room didn't gasp, it froze. The chairman hesitated with his gavel, aides stopped typing, and Republican representatives looked away or down. Crockett blinked, once, twice, letting the moment hang. Then she leaned in, voice steady and clear. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Trump. You may have spoken to a lot of women like that in your life, but I'm not here to serve you, here to serve the truth. So if my questions make you uncomfortable, maybe that says more about your answers than my tone." The room went still, so still, a staffer behind her whispered, "Damn." But Crockett didn't flinch. "Your inability to address facts without falling back on dismissive language isn't strength, it's avoidance. And you're not avoiding me today." Trump sat silent, tapping his pen, searching for a comeback that never came. The chairman finally nudged him to respond, but it didn't matter. The moment had already landed. It wasn't about disclosures anymore. It was about power, and who still thought they could wield it unchecked. Within minutes, the exchange was clipped, captioned, and viral. "Sit down, girl," trended, but not the way Trump intended. In homes across the country, people rewatched in disbelief, some with quiet satisfaction. Crockett hadn't raised her voice or broken composure. She simply turned the page like the moment hadn't happened. But for many watching, especially women who look like her, it had. And when Representative Monica Rayburn glanced over and whispered, "That's how you handle it," no one on either side of the aisle disagreed. Representative Neil Camden scribbled something into his notebook and whispered to his assistant. She just turned the room upside down. Across the aisle, Trump's smirk had vanished. The usual swagger in his voice, replaced by something tighter annoyance, maybe confusion, like someone had struck a nerve in a language he couldn't quite decipher. He muttered into the mic, "I'm just saying there's a way to talk to people," but no one answered. The energy had shifted, and for once, it wasn't centered on him. The chairman tapped his gavel not to scold, but simply to move on. "Representative Crockett, you have the floor," he said, and she did in every sense. Without missing a beat, Crockett returned to her questioning, never referencing what had just happened. She didn't have to. The moment was already doing its work outside the Capitol. News vans updated their banners. Trump to Crockett, "Sit down, girl," during heated exchange, while inside cable newsrooms, producers scrapped segments and barked new orders. Cut to Crockett, "Get the full clip." In homes across the country, people rewound and rewatched. In a Columbus bar, two teachers watched on mute. One mouthed, "Did he really just say that?" In a Tempe dorm, a political science major launched a thread titled, "Why This Crockett Moment Matters More Than You Think." Had over 90,000 shares by morning. Meanwhile, reporters clustered outside the chamber, hoping for a statement, but her team had locked things down. Crockett exited quietly, flanked by aides, eyes forward, no need for words. Her silence said everything. She wasn't trying to go viral, she was just doing her job. But that evening, when her communications director Kiara Owens opened her phone and nearly dropped it, the numbers told a different story. Over 2 million views in under 4 hours. Hashtags trending. Celebrities quoting her line. Civil rights leaders reaching out for interviews. She turned to Crockett, who was calmly finishing a folder of documents at her desk. "You know they're calling this the line of the decade, right?" Kiara asked. Crockett didn't even look up. "They can call it what they want. I call it Tuesday." While she stayed focused, the rest of the country was just beginning to react, and the conversation was about to erupt. Long before she was Congresswoman Crockett, before the cameras, the trending hashtags, the headlines, she was just Jasmine, raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Her mother worked nights at a health clinic. Her father drove a school bus and never missed a day behind the wheel. In her house, you didn't speak unless you had something worth saying, and when you did, you said it like you meant it. She wasn't the loudest in school, but she had a way of making teachers pause. Classmates used to joke, "Jasmine doesn't argue, she cross-examines." By 16, she was volunteering in municipal court, not for credit or class, just to sit and listen. She liked the way truth sounded when it had nowhere to hide. Her path to politics started, not in D.C., but in a courtroom in Texarkana, Texas. Fresh out of law school, she took a case no one else wanted, a young man wrongfully arrested and jailed for 3 days without charges, too broke for a lawyer, the city hoping it would quietly disappear. But Crockett didn't let it. She stayed up for 2 nights, pulling records, cross-checking officer reports, interviewing witnesses others had ignored. When she laid it all out in court, the judge stopped her halfway through her opening statement and asked, "Miss Crockett, are you sure you're fresh out of law school?" She smiled. "Only on paper." The case she took as a fresh law grad was over in less than an hour and she won. Word spread fast. That's how she moved. Quiet wins with loud meaning. Over the next 5 years, Jasmine Crockett became the person families called when everything else had failed: police, misconduct, land disputes, eviction battles. She took cases for free when she had to, made her living off the ones she could bill. By the time she ran for the state legislature, she wasn't just known, she was trusted. She didn't talk like a politician. She talked like someone who had sat at the kitchen tables of people who don't have lobbyists. That mattered. When she won her seat in the Texas House, they told her to play it safe, keep her head down, learn the game. She did the opposite. In her first year, she authored a bill challenging aggressive police tactics during protests. It didn't pass, but the hearings drew national attention. That was the first time C-SPAN viewers saw her in action. Voice calm, hair pulled back, surrounded by men twice her age, who couldn't get her to blink, much less back down. In D.C., party leaders began watching her clips on mute just to study her posture. No nervous smiles, no fidgeting, just intention. When she ran for Congress, it wasn't ambition, it was scale. She wanted a bigger table because she was tired of shouting from the hallway. When she won, she sent her mother a note. "You told me to make my voice matter. I found a bigger mic." So when Trump told her to sit down, girl, in front of the world, she wasn't shocked. She'd heard worse from judges, police chiefs, developers who mistook her for someone's assistant. But she also knew something else. This time, millions were watching. Girls who looked like her. Women who had been silenced or sidelined with that same lazy disrespect for decades. She didn't scream. She didn't throw papers. She didn't storm out. She just did what she always does: cut to the truth and let it stand on its own. That's why the clip hit hard. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was the culmination of a story that began in courtrooms, city halls, and long nights spent staring at spreadsheets, trying to help someone keep their home. Now, all that history had met a platform too big to ignore. But while the cameras captured the confrontation, what they missed was what happened after. The hearing adjourned just after 5:30 p.m., but the real noise began the moment the feed cut. Aides scrambled to pack up files. Reporters angled for off-the-record comments. Members quietly slipped toward side exits, and security rushed Trump through a separate door shielded from the growing swarm of press waiting just outside. On the Capitol steps behind the dais, Jasmine Crockett quietly gathered her papers, neither rushing nor lingering. A junior staffer handed her a bottle of water without a word. She took it, gave a subtle nod, and walked toward the hallway. She hadn't said anything about the moment, not to the press, not even to her team, but everyone else was talking. Down the corridor, Representative Elaine Brewster leaned against a marble column, whispering into her phone. Yes, I heard it live. No, she didn't flinch. Yes, he really said that. 2 floors down in the press room, chaos, raindrops firing off tweets by the second, phones ringing non-stop. Need confirmation? Did Trump actually say girl on the record? Has Crockett responded? Is she booked for MSNBC tonight? Meanwhile, just off the House floor in a private office, Trump fumed. That woman, she was disrespectful. He snapped at an advisor. I was answering the damn question. The advisor stayed silent, watching a cluster of PR strategists near the window argue about next steps. Do we release a statement? Spin it as banter? No, someone said flatly. The tone was off. She was sharp, serious. You try to make it a joke, it backfires. One aide muttered, we should have seen it coming. She's got a courtroom mouth. Trump turned. What's that supposed to mean? The aide didn't flinch. She doesn't take the bait. She waits for you to hang yourself. Back in Crockett's office, her chief of staff Kiara Owens paced the floor, phone glued to her ear, answering a dozen media requests in real time. Every few seconds, another one came in. Another call buzzed through. CNN, MSNBC, The Route, BBC. Even a French outlet wanted a comment. But Jasmine Crockett remained silent, still seated, still sipping her water. I need to talk to her, Kiara said into the phone. No, I don't know if she's going to make a statement. I don't think she's playing it that way. She looked over. You okay? Jasmine raised her eyes briefly. I'm fine. We didn't come here to feed a moment. We came to ask questions. But even she knew it was bigger now. Outside the Capitol, protesters had already begun to gather. Some held signs that read "Respect Black Women," while others wore shirts with her quote printed boldly across the front. It didn't take long, someone had it on Etsy within hours. As she exited, a reporter called out, Congresswoman Crockett, do you feel disrespected? She stopped, turned toward the mic, and said simply, I feel focused. That clip alone became a headline on every morning show. Inside conservative media, the spin began. Talk radio hosts played the exchange on a loop, insisting Trump's tone was casual, misunderstood. But what about her tone? One barked. What about her attitude? But the center wasn't holding. This wasn't about tone anymore. This was about pattern. In progressive circles, the response was swift and cutting. Black women don't get to have bad days, one commentator wrote. They get told to sit down, no matter how qualified, how calm, how right they are. Crockett's inbox flooded, some emails supportive, others not. One stood out. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't back down. You didn't blink. My daughter just asked me what your name was. That means something. Thank you. She read it 3 times. But outside her office, the media storm kept building, and Trump's team wasn't staying quiet. By nightfall, his media machine was fully engaged. The clip had gone viral, yes, but that didn't mean they'd let the narrative settle without a fight. In a sleek office in Arlington, a team of strategists gathered around a flat screen, replaying the exchange for the 15th time. She didn't yell, one aide said. She didn't get emotional. That's going to make it harder. Then flip it, another replied. Say he was being casual. Say she misunderstood. One intern hesitated. It doesn't really sound casual. The room fell quiet. Watching remotely from Mar-a-Lago, Trump leaned back in his chair and muttered, "They'll forget about it in a week. We just need something louder." So the plan formed fast. Distract, discredit, double down. The first wave came in tweets from political allies, followed by official statements defending Trump's candor. One senator posted, "Americans are tired of performative outrage. The president spoke plainly. Period. What happened today wasn't offensive, it was political theater. And Representative Crockett knows how to play the cameras." One pundit scoffed on Twitter. Another chimed in, "This is what happens when we can't even talk to each other without someone crying racism." The next morning, Trump appeared on a conservative radio show in Palm Springs. When the host asked if he regretted what he said to Representative Crockett, Trump chuckled. "Regret? No. I was just trying to get through a long hearing," he said. "She was going on, and I said what I said. People are too sensitive." The host pushed back gently. "But do you think the way you said it?" Trump cut him off. "I didn't say anything wrong. And you know what? A lot of people agree with me, they just don't say it out loud." He grinned like it was checkmate, but the damage wasn't going anywhere. Meanwhile, Crockett remained silent, aside from her single calm remark outside the Capitol. That silence made more noise than any press release could. People wanted a reaction. She gave them focus instead. That night on CBS, political analyst Trevor Langford said it plainly. "This isn't about a phrase, it's about a habit. It's about a man who's had power for decades and still acts like power is its own excuse." Back in Texas, local news aired features titled, "Who is Jasmine Crockett?" spotlighting her legal career, community work, and reputation in the courtroom. Viewers who'd never heard her name before were now paying close attention. Her staff worked around the clock, every outlet wanted her. The Today Show, CNN, NPR, even late-night shows. But Crockett was selective. She wasn't chasing a media moment. Let the hearing record speak for itself. She told her team, "This isn't just about what he said, it's about how I responded. That's what matters." Still, the online attacks escalated. Fake quotes, doctored images, and unrelated clips were circulated to paint Jasmine Crockett as angry, loud, disrespectful. One video compiled every time she'd interrupted someone during past hearings, trying to frame her as hostile. It gained traction in far-right circles, but the broader narrative didn't budge. Because for every manipulated edit, there were 5 authentic clips showing her steady, sharp, and unshaken. A young journalist, Maya Latin, captured it best in a column for the Arizona Times. "We don't ask men to shrink themselves to be heard. We ask women to smile while they're dismissed." Crockett didn't smile. She didn't shout. She corrected, and that correction landed louder than any yell. Meanwhile, Trump's defenders got noisier, but it was starting to sound like shouting, over a crowd that had already turned away. Even he seemed to know this wasn't going away quietly. While his team scrambled for distractions, the rest of the country had already shifted focus. A new conversation was unfolding, one Crockett didn't have to lead, because her response had already lit the fuse. By day 3, the moment was everywhere. Morning shows debated it. Late-night hosts joked about it. Professors analyzed it in ethics classes. Conservative pundits raged about identity politics. Progressives called it a reckoning. And somewhere between the headlines and the hashtags, something unexpected happened. People started listening, not to Trump, not to party lines, but to what the moment revealed. It wasn't about tax policy or trade. It wasn't even about Trump anymore. It was about what it means to be heard. In Birmingham, Alabama, a high school debate coach named Lorraine Reeves played the clip for her students, then paused the screen. "Tell me what you saw," she said. A girl in the front row raised her hand. He didn't expect her to answer like that. Another student added, "It's like..." He thought he was talking to someone who wouldn't answer at all. The room nodded in agreement. Hundreds of miles away, in Des Moines, Iowa, A retired librarian named Tom Beck posted a quiet message on Facebook that went unexpectedly viral. I'm 76. I've lived through hearings, scandals, speeches, but this wasn't about left or right. This was about whether we're okay with powerful people speaking to others like they don't belong in the room. The post was shared over 20,000 times. In Phoenix, Farrah Densley, someone who had never once spoken publicly about politics, uploaded a short video explaining why Crockett's response made her cry. Her voice cracked as she said, "My daughter's going to grow up in a world where she hears that kind of sentence and knows exactly what it means. And more importantly, she'll know how to respond." Even comedians joined the conversation. On stage at the Hamilton Inn, NYC, stand-up comic Will Ortega put it simply, "She didn't clap back. She didn't pop off. She told the truth, calmly. And that's what shook people the most, truth. From a black woman they assumed they could talk over. Still, the divide was clear." Crockett's congressional inbox overflowed with messages, thousands. Many were supportive. Some were hateful. One simply read, "You're everything wrong with this country. Sit down," just like he said. She didn't reply. She never did with those. But it weighed on her staff. One night, Kiara, her communications director, scrolled through the messages, paused, and whispered, "It's always louder when they feel seen." Crockett, seated across the room, responded without looking up, because silence protects them. By then, social media had adopted Crockett not just as a moment, but a movement, both symbol and standard. Black women were quoting her in Instagram captions. Young girls were posting side-by-side photos of her and other barrier-breaking women in politics. On Twitter, long threads unpacked the phrase, "Sit down, girl," not just for what it was, but for what it represented. It became a case study in American power dynamics, but it was no longer just commentary. Something shifted when a group of middle-aged women in Spokane, Washington, organized a handwritten letter-writing campaign to thank Crockett. Over 300 envelopes arrived by week's end. Then came the poll numbers. An independent survey showed a rare surge in approval for Crockett among voters aged 40–60 across both parties. More surprising still, nearly 40% of some independents said her response made them more interested in her views on policy. That's when it became clear this wasn't just a trending topic, it was resonance. In private, Crockett kept her circle small. She didn't cry, didn't vent, but she did call her father. "You sounded like your mama," he told her. She laughed. She would have thrown her shoe, he added, and made him hand it back. It was a rare moment of levity in a week heavy with consequence. Because even as the country argued, dissected, defended, and posted, one truth stayed rooted. Crockett didn't ask for this moment. She just refused to run from it. No one expected a quiet correction to spark a national reckoning, but it did. 3 days after the hearing, the conversation wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump anymore. It had expanded, echoing into corners of American life that rarely make it onto cable news. People weren't just tweeting, they were talking about what it means to be heard when you're not the expected voice in the room, especially when that room holds power. In a university auditorium in Boulder, Colorado, Professor Shelby Gaines stood before a packed class, replaying Crockett's hearing response. "This," she said, circling the word truth on the board, "is what composure sounds like beside power." A student raised his hand. "Why did it go so viral?" "Because," Gaines replied, "sometimes it's not the words, it's the setting. It's who they're said to, and who refuses to shrink." Meanwhile, in Dallas, Reverend Carl Winston preached without notes. Pacing the aisles of his church, voice low and full of steel. "They told her to sit down," he said, "but she sat in her truth. And that church is resistance." A few miles away, at a black-owned coffee shop near South Lamar, regulars debated over espresso and headlines. She played it perfect, one woman said, stirring her tea. Didn't give them a soundbite, gave them a mirror. But what if she'd clapped back harder? Her friend asked. Would it have landed stronger? No, a man at the counter said, turning around. You know why it hit hard. Because she knew she didn't need to be louder to be stronger. Not everyone agreed. Some tried to bend the moment to fit safer narratives. On cable news, pundits dismissed it as an overreaction. One guest on a syndicated morning show even asked, maybe it's just how he talks. Shouldn't we give him the benefit of the doubt? That clip spread too, but this time, it met a wall of fierce rebuttals. Because while TV debates churned on, real stories began to surface, stories from women, especially black women, who had been dismissed in meetings, interrupted mid or called girl by men with more power and less experience. An assistant principal in El Paso posted a video saying she'd heard that phrase 5 times in her career, ever from a student, always from someone in a suit. In Portland, a healthcare executive penned a local op-ed titled, I was told to calm down, girl during a budget meeting. I was the CFO. These weren't bursts of outrage. They were the steady release of long-held exhaustion, finally given voice. And through it all, Crockett never stepped into the spotlight. She declined the biggest national interviews, refused to cast herself as a victim. Her only public comment came during a quiet Q&A with a local journalist in Austin. Do you think he was being intentionally disrespectful? The reporter asked. Crockett paused. I think intent is less important than impact, she said. And if someone doesn't understand the weight of their words, maybe they shouldn't be carrying them in public. That line landed just as sharply as the one in the hearing. In Detroit, civil rights organizers launched a new series of workshops for young women of color. The first flyer read, You don't have to yell to be powerful, just be clear. In Tallahassee, a high school junior named Gia read Crockett's quote aloud before advocating for a student-led ethics committee at a school board meeting and earned a standing ovation. In the background, political analysts had started whispering about 2028, not because Crockett had hinted at anything, but because something had shifted, and her name was now at the center of it. Kiara, her communications director, joked about it one evening as they sorted through a flood of messages. You realize people are putting your quote on coffee mugs now. Crockett didn't even look up. I just hope they're spelling it right. You're not moved by any of this? Kiara asked. Crockett simply shrugged, saying, I'm moved that more people are listening not to me, but to each other. What neither of them expected was the email that arrived that night, buried among dozens of press requests. A message titled, Thank You from Tulsa, sent by Clara Bishop, a 68-year-old woman who had never written to a politician before. In it, Clara described watching the hearing 5 times, recalling how, in 1973, her high school principal told her she wasn't the kind of girl who gave speeches. Watching Crockett calmly respond without shrinking or yelling made her feel 17 again, like she mattered. You didn't just speak for yourself, she wrote. You spoke for every woman ever told to lower her voice when her truth made others uncomfortable. The next morning, after reading the email, Crockett didn't ask to respond, she asked to meet her. 3 days later, in a quiet Tulsa library, without cameras or announcements, Clara and Crockett sat down together. I'm not here as a congresswoman today, Crockett said. Just Jasmine. Clara smiled, replying, and I'm not 68 today. I'm 17. You gave me that. For over an hour, they spoke about life, power, and the weight of history. At one point, Clara pulled out an old newspaper clipping of Shirley Chisholm and said, When I was little, this was the woman we thought would break it all open. Crockett nodded yes, she cracked it, and now it was time to keep widening the gap. When their quiet meeting ended, she and Clara hugged, nothing staged, nothing performative, just two women bound by something deeper than politics. Clara's granddaughter, who had driven her there, snapped a quick photo by the library's front window as they laughed together. She later posted it with the caption, "My grandma met her hero today. They didn't talk politics, they talked truth." The image spread like wildfire, reshared by Ava DuVernay, Tracy Ellis Ross, and even Sherilyn Effiel, each adding their own words about legacy, lineage, and quiet courage. Clara Bishop, who had never had a social media account, became a trending name overnight. CNN picked up the story, with the headline "The Letter," that said everything without a microphone. Interview requests flooded in, but Clara declined them all except one. She wrote a single essay for her hometown paper, the Tulsa Sentinel, titled "The Day I Felt Heard," where she described Crockett not as a politician, but as a mirror, held up to a country too used to looking away. Crockett, for her part, issued no press release, recorded no campaign video, and sought no spotlight. When asked about the visit, in an interview weeks later, she simply said, "Some moments belong to the people who lived them, not the people who watched." That line became a banner headline on 3 political blogs the next morning. And as the story settled into hearts across the country, another shift quietly unfolded inside the very institution where it all began, the House of Representatives. A week after the hearing, the Ethics Committee convened an unscheduled closed-door session. No press, no cameras, just 12 members from both parties watching the same 47-second clip. "Sit down, girl." Pause. Crockett's reply. Silence. Even the usual skeptics, the ones who rolled their eyes at optics, admitted this time something had changed. It wasn't just bad PR, it was a reckoning that made the entire chamber feel complicit. Some representatives hoped it would quietly fade, but others, especially those facing re-election, pushed for an official statement not condemning Trump directly, but denouncing any form of disrespectful language toward members of Congress, regardless of gender or background. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a visible crack in a long, unshaken wall. Meanwhile, quiet discussions of procedural reform began to circulate on the House floor, setting clearer rules for how witnesses address lawmakers, even suggesting mandatory briefings for former presidents before testimony, because apparently, that's where things now stood. Outside Washington, the ripple effect was just as real. Crockett was invited to speak at Stanford's School of Government, then Harvard Law, and, surprisingly, at a small community college in Jackson, Mississippi. She accepted all 3. At Stanford, she didn't begin with the viral moment. Instead, she told a story about her first landlord-tenant case as a public defender. These people weren't waiting for headlines, she said. They were waiting for someone who would listen and make room for truth in rooms not built for them. At Harvard, she spoke about how women of color are told their voices are too loud, even when they whisper, their questions too harsh, even when they're fair. In Jackson, she put her notes aside and asked the room, "What do you do when someone tells you to sit down, politely, cruelly, or quietly?" A student in the front row replied, "You stand anyway." Crockett smiled. "Exactly. Even if your knees shake." Back in D.C., younger representatives began adopting her language in committee hearings not as mimicry, but as a kind of permission. A shift in posture. Suddenly, being direct didn't seem abrasive. Being clear didn't feel risky. Crockett herself stayed focused, introducing 2 new bills, one on data transparency in federal contracts, another on protections during emergency. Detentious. Neither referenced the hearing, but both reflected her core belief. Truth works best in daylight. Trump was still seething at a fundraiser in Pensacola. He ranted that the hearing had been a setup, the viral clip twisted, and that Crockett had an attitude. When a donor asked if he regretted saying it, he just laughed and changed the subject. Meanwhile, the world moved on, and Crockett's team stayed busy, too busy to keep up with the flood of mail or the stream of event invitations. But they noticed something. The tone of the messages had changed. It wasn't just about praise or politics anymore, it was reflection. A woman in Santa Fe wrote, "I've worked in finance for 20 years. I've been called girl more times than I can count. I never said anything. But after watching you, I walked into my boss's office and told him to use my name. Just my name. That felt like a win. A teenage boy in Oregon wrote, I showed your video to my mom. She cried. I didn't get it at first, but then she told me stories about how people talked to her at her old job. Now I get it. Thank you. Crockett, read every message. She didn't save the headlines. She saved the letters. And as stories were shared and policies debated, one quiet question lingered. What does respect look like when the cameras are off and no one's trending? The clip eventually slipped from the trending lists. New controversies took its place, but for many, the moment never really faded. It stuck not because of the drama, but because of what it revealed and what it demanded of us. In the months that followed, Representative Jasmine Crockett never called it a viral moment, never labeled it historic, never packaged it into a neat story for media consumption. She knew better. Real change happens in conversations, in small rooms, and the quiet choices people make about how to show up. She kept showing up. 2 hearings, 2 town halls, 2 school gyms, and church basements. She kept asking sharp questions. She wrote legislation that may never trend, but will shape lives. She didn't turn the moment into a brand, she let it become a benchmark, a reminder of what it means to stand firm without raising your voice. That's what stayed with people. As a teacher in Flagstaff said, at a parent forum, my daughter watched that clip. She didn't see a woman being disrespected. She saw what strength looks like. She saw a woman respond like she knew exactly who she was, and in an age of overreaction, that kind of composure became radical. Because here's the truth. There are still too many rooms in this country where respect isn't given equally. Too many tables where some voices are expected to stay quiet. Too many conversations where power demands obedience instead of honesty. Moments like this don't just reveal the cracks. They show us who's ready to stand firm without flinching. Crockett didn't win a battle that day. She didn't humiliate anyone or dominate the room. What she did was quietly redefine what strength looks like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was stillness. It was letting someone reveal themselves while never moving from your spot. It was saying, simply and clearly, you don't get to speak to me like that. And that kind of clarity lingers. So maybe the lesson is this. When you know who you are, you don't have to prove anything in the heat of the moment. You just have to stay rooted. When someone tries to shrink you, don't mirror their energy, hold your own. Because people notice. They remember how you stood, how you stayed steady, how you made your point without cruelty. That sticks. Whether you're in a courtroom, a classroom, a boardroom, or a hearing streamed across the nation, speak with intention. Ask the hard questions. And when someone tries to reduce you to one sentence, answer with one that lasts. Because that's how truth travels. And if this story made you think about someone you love, a time you stayed quiet, or a moment you finally spoke, don't let it end here. Pass it on. Start the conversation. Subscribe for stories that cut through the noise and focus on what really matters.